I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a closer look here by getting my magnifier in there. First, hook. That's it. That's the, it's a TMCO, standard TMCO TMC 101 dry fly hook with a ring eye. Thread is tan 6/0, and I'm going to start that by tying right behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to wrap down here the thread down about 3 eye widths back from the eye. Now, this is an unconventional way to tie this fly. Normally what you would do is you would tie the tail in, and then you would tie the deer hair body, and then at the end you would put the little wingtips on and the hackle. But I found that doing that made it very difficult to tie the wingtips in at the front of the eye of the hook. So I modified the process a little bit to make it a little easier to do the hackle tip wings. So now the wings are, so we're going to tie them in first. So the wings are actually these guys, and that's a matched pair of grizzly hackle tips. They come off of one of these guys, a neck, and usually way down here, not at the very shortest, but you want some width to the tip. And usually you can pick them off the neck in pairs. And if you're going to tie a number of these, I would suggest you do what I did already, which is do the wingtip and the hackle prep well before you start, and do it for a whole bunch if you're going to tie a whole bunch. So what you end up with is a feather like this. And what you want is the hackle tip wings to be the length of the shank of the hook, and that's from behind the eye to the bend. So I measure it like that, hold it with my left hand, and then I pull the barbules back. You can see how that works. And I'll remeasure until it's about the right length. And I would do that one, and then I would do the next one as well. I would do, because it requires 2 of these. And then to want to bear the stem, so what I would normally do is I would take my tweezers, hold on to the tip, and I would grab these little barbules on the side and pull them off the side of the hook, off the stem. Now, I'm not going to waste a pile of time doing that with a whole bunch of feathers, so right now. So I've already done those for 2 of them. So now I have a pair of these. You can see what they look like. They're paired up, and they're about the same length, and there's some bare hackle stem. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these, and you can see these guys have a dull side and a shiny side, or an intense colored side. So I'm going to, for the far wing on the far hook from me, I'm going to face the better colored side towards me, and I'm going to lay this bare stem down on the hook, and I'm going to wrap a couple of wraps of thread, this 2 eye widths back from the hook, and I'm going to place that stem so it is on the far side of the hook, and then I'm going to pull on the bared stem to get it right back underneath the thread. And that's why you only need a couple of wraps. And then what I'm going to do is give it another good solid wrap. And I got that there. I'm going to make sure it's down good and snug. And I'm going to then, oh crap, I'm going to trim off the excess stem here. I'm going to take the other one, get my scissors back from the floor. And I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to put the more intensely colored side facing away from me. I'm going to put it on the near side of the hook. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do it. Oops. Now again, this is one of those tricks. To do a loose wrap around this, I want the loop when I'm making it to fall towards the back. So if I'm looking down on the top, I'll spin my bobbin counterclockwise, and that will make the loop go towards the back of the hook. So I can place it nice. Two wraps, and then I'm going to, oop, that didn't work. It didn't go on the side, it went on the top. There we go, that's on the side. So now I'm going to make sure I have, I think I just lost my tip. The first tip, rats. Now I am going to have to prep another tip. Poop. Okay, 1, 2. Pull it back. This time I get that other one that I was working on. Where'd it go? So now I'm going to have to get my tweezers out and make this hackle tip the same as the other one. Sorry about that delay. This is tedious part. It's a little long. So I'm going to get some more off of there. This is I had real trouble with doing these hackle tips. Would be after I had done the body. And what you don't want to do is go to all the trouble of snipping the body and then not be able to tie the wings on. Okay. So there's the other one. I'm going to put it on the near side of the hook this time, hopefully.
Dave, is that the length of the shank?
Yep.
Okay.
The tip portion is the length of the shank.
Okay.
Okay, now I got them on. Okay. And I got the stem bound down. Now this one's not going to come off the hook this time. Just to make sure that they are, that's better. Just to make sure that they're on the proper sides of the hook, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to pull the near one and wrap in front of it. And then I'm going to pull the far one away and wrap in front of it. So, and the reason I do that is because so now you can see that they're split on either side of the eye of the hook. That's going to make them a whole bunch easier to manage later. And I'm not going to stand them up because then they're going to be in the way when I do the deer hair body. So now I'm going to come back about halfway down the hook and I'm going to put the tail in. And the tail is moose mane. See what that looks like. And I'm going to have, and the reason for moose mane is because this is a fairly heavily hackled fly with some prominent wings that stick up. You want a little bit of weight and stiffness in the tail to hold the fly at the right height, right angle. So I'm going to get the moose mane out, get my hair stacker and put the moose mane in my hair stacker. Whack it. And that evens up the tips. I'm going to measure that at least shank length from the eye almost to the bend. I want these a little longer. And get the long end of the butts out of the way. And then I'm going to hold it down on the bend of the hook and I'm going to do a quick little wrap or two. And then I'm going to, this is a trick I saw on that video that uses the magic tool. I'm going to grab the tail and I'm going to pull it towards me a little bit on this side of the hook. Do a couple of wraps. Pull it on the far side of the hook, give it a couple of wraps. And what that does is that makes sure that all the moose hair is on top of the hook. And then I'm going to hold it up and wrap tight turns all the way down the shank of the hook to the bend. I'm going to make sure if it's not quite on top, I'm going to pull it towards me or away from me to make sure that that moose hair is right on top of the hook. Now, one of the other things I discovered is when you're spinning deer hair on with this tail in the way, if you happen to do your first spin a little too tight to the tail, it'll cause the tail to wrap around the bend of the hook. And to stop that, I'm going to go around underneath the hair and over, and one more around underneath the hair and over. And what that does is that keeps that moose hair from spinning when I spin the hook, the deer hair. So now I'm going to get the butts of this moose out of the way. I have to pick them up, trim them off. Come on, get the other scissors. So I got all the butts. I'm going to trim them off right on top of the hook. And for beginners, this is one thing you always try to remember. When you're trimming material off, always trim it on top of the hook. Slide your scissors down till it touches the hook shank and then trim. That way there's no danger of you trimming your thread, which is hanging down below, and ending up with everything in a pile on the floor when you cut the thread. So now I'm going to make sure my thread is just about one wrap in front of where that tie-in point is. And I'm going to tie on the deer hair body. Deer hair. There's good deer hair and there's bad deer hair. This stuff I got from Robinson's. It's called ex-caddis deer hair. What I like about this stuff is that it's very fine. You can see how fine the fibers of the deer hair are. It's really very fine material. And I'm going to tie it by taking a chunk, getting my scissors underneath and taking a chunk out, and not too big because at the back of the hook, it's a little skinnier than at the front. So I'm just taking a chunk off the pelt. And you can see it's about as much as the gap of the hook. Now I'm going to hold it by the tip in my left hand, and I'm going to do this and pull the fuzz out. If you don't pull the fuzz out, it won't spin properly. So I'm going to loosen up, pull the fuzz out. Now I'm going to hold that in my right hand, and I want to use more hair from the tip to do this tying than I want from the butt. So what I'm going to do is, and I don't want the tips because I don't want this is going to be a very short bunch of deer hair by the time I'm done. So I'm going to trim off the tips. And by the way, I'm doing this over my wastebasket so it doesn't end up in the carpet. Now I got the tips trimmed off. I'm going to transfer it to this hand so that I've got now a little piece of hair where I'm holding it roughly in the middle. I'm going to lay this down on the shank on the near side of the hook at a little bit of an angle. And I'm going to make one loose wrap over top, not tighten it too much, just flares a teeny bit. Then I'm going to bring the thread up to the top of the hook, and I'm going to start going around and tightening. And as I do that, I let go of the left hand and spin. And that's the first batch of deer hair that's spun on the hook. Now to make this body nice and compact, I'm going to use my thumb and finger and push it back, watching out that I don't impale myself on the hook. I'm going to wiggle my thread through until I can stroke that back, and my thread's just in front of that last batch. Then I'm going to do this again. Same routine. This time I'm going to use a little bigger clump of hair. I used a small clump at the beginning because I wanted the hair to spin around and not get caught up in the bend of the hook. Once again, hold it by the tip, get the buzz out. We'll be doing this about 3 times. This time I'm going to trim a little less of the tips off. It's going to be a little bit longer group of deer hair. So as you can see, it's a little longer this time around. Again, hold it in the middle. Going to lay it down on the hook at that angle. Just a loose wrap, get it to flare just a teeny bit, thread up, and as I tighten and pull it around, it's going to spin. Go fuzzy. Then I'm going to take my thumb and forefinger again and push it to the back. Make sure I keep my wingtips out of the way. You want to keep protecting them. I'm going to do one more here before I'm finished. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space when I do this behind where I've tied in the wingtips, the hackle tips. Now this can be a little bit bigger batch again. Not huge, but that's a little bit thick, but it should work. Again, fluff it out. Might be a little bit too much. And this one, because it's going to spin close to the hackle tips, it might spin them around. So I'm going to reverse it. And I'm going to cut off the tips of the deer hair again. Again, a little shorter batch this time. And again, I'm going to make sure this deer hair is packed out of the way. Get my thread in front. And I'm going to get in here and lay that. Actually, stroke that back out of the way. Make sure the previous batch of hair is out of the way or it won't spin properly. I'm going to again hold that down at that angle. Get in here and do a little bit of a pull, and then I'm going to snug it around and make it go around the hook. Less well than the other. So now I can get and shove this back. Again, keeping these hackle tips out of the way. Okay. So I have a hackle tip on each, still have a hackle tip on each side of the eye of the hook. Now comes the fun part. Going to get my thread in front here. I'm going to use my whip finisher, and I'm going to tie off my thread. Now the reason for that is now I'm going to get in here and I'm going to trim the deer hair. So I hold this upside down, make sure my wing tips are out of the way. And I'm going to come in right parallel to the hook shank with my scissors and trim off the deer hair. Again, this is being done over my little waist catcher so that it doesn't end up on the floor. So you can see I've tied that, cut that straight across parallel to the shank of the hook on the bottom. I'm going to get in here and clip the stuff at the back as well. And get in behind the hackle tips and clear those out. And then I'm going to turn it on its side. And I'm going to take my scissor and I'm going to hold them at an angle where it's higher at the front and lower at the back. And I'm going to do a similar trim there because I want this body to be a little bit tapered from the front to the back. And I'm going to turn it and do the other side. Take my vise up here and do the same thing on the other side. This is what takes the time. And then I'm going to do the top the same way, trying not to trim the tail off as I do this. Now it looks a little rough. So I'm going to get my scissors now and I'm going to lay them down between the wingtips and the deer hair body. And I'm going to trim off all these little scraggly bits at the front of the body. Get these over there. Then I'm going to do the other thing, the same thing at the back. I'm going to hold the moose mane tail out of the way, down, pull it down out of the way. I'm going to slide my scissors up along the top of that moose mane to the back of the body and trim the deer hair off. And I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm going to keep the fibers underneath my scissors so I don't trim them off. Slide it in under there. And this is really the tricky part, is getting at the back of this thing so that I'm not trimming the moose mane, but I'm getting the deer hair. Come on, get out of there. Very finicky. And you'll notice that when I'm doing this, I'm resting my left hand on my right hand. And that keeps the scissors from wobbling around and trimming stuff you don't want to trim, because it gives you a little more steady hand. And I do this all around at the bend of the hook. You can see I can get here fairly close without running a risk of trimming those hairs off. There's a few still left here. I get that, lifted them up this time and get them from underneath. So it's finicky. Now I can just adjust, you can trim this deer hair body forever if you're trying to make it really pretty. But I'm not. I'm just going to get it more or less the shape I want. I want to get all the little teeny deer hair bits that are sticking out and making it look more like a porcupine than a fuzzy body. So I'm trying to get that cleaned off. You can do this with a razor blade, but I find if you try it with the razor blade, you run the risk of picking off the tail or the wings. Okay, so that's not bad. There's a couple of little fibers here I should get. Having a good pair of fine scissor points really makes this a whole lot easier. Not the cheap scissors for that one. Okay, so that's the deer hair body. You can see why you've got to trim the body before you put the hackle on. Otherwise, you'd be trimming the hackle all over the place. So now I'm going to tie my thread back in right in front of that deer hair body. Just make sure that's on there. Good. Now I'm going to stand these wings up. I'm going to stand the far side one up and wrap in front of it a couple of turns. And then I'm going to bring the near side one back, stand it up, do a couple of turns over across it in front. And I see they're more or less standing up. Gonna pull them out of the way because I got a few little strands of or bits of hackle fiber that are sticking out the eye of the hook. Just gonna protect the wingtips with my fingers while I trim off the little bits. There we go. Now the wings, you can see there that now the wings are standing up and they're well divided. Now the hackles. So I've prepped these hackles again, select them from the neck, and I've done previously, I've measured them on the hook to make sure that the barbs are a little more than the gap of the hook. And I'm going to tie the grizzly one in with the shiny side of the grizzly hackle away from me, stem on the near side, in behind these two hackle tips. And I'm going to wrap that in there good and snug, come in front of them and bind down the stem in front of those wingtips. And then I'm going to pull the stem back. I'm going to carefully get in here and trim that stem out. I'm going to cinch the stem down. So that's the grizzly hackle. And then I've got where it went? Where'd he go? There he is. So I'd this is a furnace hackle, and by furnace, it's a brown hackle that has a little bit of a dark color in the core. See that? And so I'm going to tie this guy again. I'm going to tie it so that the bright color is away from me. I'm going to tie it in exactly the same place I tied the grizzly hackle in. And when I tie these in, I'm going to tie it so there's just a little bit of stem between where I tied it on the hook and where the barbules start. And the reason for that is that that first wrap around the shank, if it's stem, the hackle will have a less tendency to twist. So once again, I'm going to carefully get in here, pull the thread out of the way with my left hand and trim the stem out. Put my thread in front, right behind the eye, and make sure my wings are still good. And now I get me hackle pliers, and I'm first going to take the grizzly hackle, and I'm going to do a wrap behind the dun one, the furnace one, where it's tied in. A couple of wraps in there. These are behind the wing tips, or the hackle tips. Another wrap in behind. And then I'm going to, underneath, I'm going to bring that hackle forward in front of the hackle tips. And I'm going to do a couple of wraps there. Hold it up, and I'm going to tie it down on top this time. A couple or three wraps in behind it. And a couple of wraps in front. And go in here, and again from the top, I'm going to carefully come down the stem of the hackle and not snip hard. I'm just going to use kind of the edge of the scissors to take that hackle tip out. And then I'm going to grab the furnace hackle by the tip, and I'm going to do a nice 2 wraps in behind, and I have to wiggle this back and forth so I don't trap down the grizzly hackle. And then I'm going to do the same thing in front of the wingtips. A couple of wraps, And again, 2 or 3 over top of the hackle in the back, and then switching hands, a couple of wraps in front. Make sure there's some space there. Carefully come in with my scissors, the edge of my scissors, and come down and just, again, just bite the stem off. Hackle. Now, whip finisher, hook, and around. And I'm going to get up here and tie a whip finish. Oop, that did not work. I'll do it with my fingers. Can place it a little better with my finger. And then snug it down. And just to be sure, I'm going to make sure I have another couple of wraps. And I've used again, my 2 fingernails just to make sure that the eye is clear. Bring my scissors in on the edge of the thread and boom, it's done. And that's him. Now, if you can still get in here, there's a few little sticky outy bits I can trim out with my scissors, but I'm going to be very careful not to get too close to the tail or to the eye, to the hackle tip wings. And that's him.
And see why that's not a beginner fly, Dave.
Yes, there's a lot of techniques in there that make, and it's such cramped quarters that you need to make sure you have good steady hands and you can place your thread wraps exactly where you want. So this is more of a challenging fly for those who are interested. It is apparently a very good early season dry fly for fishing for browns on the Cowichan and cutthroat trout on the Cowichan. So I figured it was appropriate time of year to, if anybody wants to attempt this, to have a go. So there you go.
Well done.
It's a nice looking fly, Dave.
Yeah, turned out. And they float like a bloody cork because of the deer hair. It's hollow, of course, so you can see it.
Do you use floatants on it?
Nope, don't bother. Just the way it is. So that's him. Now Florin gets to entertain you with a much simpler fly.
Yes,
Hey, Dave,
indeed.
I just mentioned that I found that it kind of imitates a traveling sedge.
Yeah,
in the
it would be good
interior.
for that later in the season too, yeah.
Yeah, I think the real key is the floatability
Yeah, yeah.
during
It does.
those fantastic feeding times.
It floats like a cork.
Yeah.
The deer hair, it sits right on top of everything. And with these longer, oh, that's another thing. Because it's a ring eye, if you were to tie a short non-slip loop in that, it will sit upright. It won't fall over on the water. If you had a down eye or an up eye, just tying a regular knot through it, there's a tendency for it to lie on its side. Whereas having a little non-slip loop in front has it sit properly in the water. So there we go. That's probably one of the more difficult ones that we'll tie. So Florin, you're up.
Okay. There I go. All right, so it's certainly easier than what Dave just showed us. but it's and it's a fly that, you know, you're as a beginner fly tyer, this was one of the first things I tied, and I ever hooked a fish on. And then, you know, as I tied more and I'm coming back to this fly, I find that, well, you know, to get this fly right isn't that exactly that easy. So it's you got to start somewhere, but it's also not the easiest fly to tie. Anyway, lots easier. So if I goof this up, then I'm still a beginner. Okay. To start with, a size 10 kind of nymph longer shank hook. So this is a Masthead 9671 size 10. And then thread, just plain black thread, whatever you have handy. This one I have in the bobbin is a Danville 3/0. Uni 6/0 thread would do the same trick. The sizing on these threads is apparently quite a zoo if you have time to waste on reading up on this. And I was just reading some little blurb on threads last night. So this is apparently as thick as the 6/0. Anyway, the starting point is a tag of red wool. And this red wool that I have here is basically anything you have hanging around that looks to you like a decent red color is going to do the trick. This is just some leftover sock wool that my wife was kind enough to share with me. She's knitting up a little sock storm right now, so there's all kinds of interesting colors being left over. But this red was one that I asked for. I was like, this really looks nice. Oh, I don't have too much of it. Well, it doesn't matter. Just a little bit goes a long way. So cut a tag. So basically the length of this tag is roughly about the size of the hook gap, and just tie it right on top. And trim it if you want to avoid having too much bulk here at the back. And the next thing I'm going to attach is a little bit of wire. So this is a brassy size wire that I'm using, and copper. The color is not that important here, but copper is usually nice and soft and easy to work with. So I like to do that. So what I do with the copper is, again, you know, hold it at an angle here, go a few wraps forward. The thread is just going to move the wire nice in line with the hook shank. And then I'm going to, as I'm wrapping backwards, I want to go back to the end of where I tied the tag. I'm just angling now the wire towards me so that it is nicely on my side of the hook. That's going to be important at the very, very end. Okay, so you don't want it on top, you want it on your side. Okay, so that's why you don't see it. I'm just going to let the wire hang on my vise and add some chenille. Here, you know, you can use, I'm going to use an olive medium-sized chenille. I have some chenille with some black sparkly stuff in it. You can also use, if you want a yellow body, which is kind of the standard traditional woolly worm. I have here some embroidery floss. Either material works very well. So I'm just going to go with the olive chenille. Trim just a little bit off that fuzz to expose the core. So this way, when you tie it in, you don't get all that extra bulk on the hook. Just tie this in and go again to where you've tied the tag, and then just move the thread forward. Okay. Now I'm going to wrap the chenille. Notice I still have the chenille on the card. I don't like to cut pieces of chenille and then wrap it. I just wrap straight off the card. So just go around.
What the hell's going on here?
This, of course, is going to be one of those places where tying rotary is definitely going to make your life easier, but one can manage. You just kind of keep going around with a card and unwind chenille as you need it. And then when you come to the front, just make sure, see how I'm leaving. It's about an eye's length, always left empty, so that I have room to finish the fly and build a proper head there. And then holding it up, trim. Okay. So this is the body. Just make sure this is well secured here. And now I'm going to add some hackle. What I have here is a piece of grizzly saddle, quite long one. I tie a bunch of flies out of one of these. And I'm going to prepare this for tying the following way. I'm just going to pull back some of the fibers at the front. Some people like to just bare this completely. I don't like that. I like to leave a little bit of those barbs. I don't know if they're visible there at all against this background, but basically I cut and I just left, like, you know, a millimeter or so of barbs on either side. Okay. So then with this hackle here prepared, I'm just going to attach it again, hold the stem at an angle, give it a few good wraps here, and move the thread again where the chenille ends. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hackle and I'm going to start spiraling it backwards in nice even turns. And try to time it so that my last wrap comes right at the tail end. And then I grab the wire, which is hanging handily nearby, and I'm going to secure the hackle at the end with a full wrap of the wire. And then I'm just going to drop the hackle, let it hang there. And I'm going to take the wire and I'm going to spiral now forward through the hackle. And what I have to do is, if I maintain the correct angle, I'm not really catching any of the hackle fibers. And I go, the trick is to go evenly and to match basically the spacing that you used for wrapping the hackle. So you end up with a similar number of wire wraps as you had for the hackle. And when you get to the front, secure this with 2 or 3 turns of thread. And now the wire, rather than cutting it and leaving an ugly stub, and this is where copper wire is better than pretty much anything else because it's soft, you just take and twist it around, kind of like a helicopter rotor motion, and just break it off. That breaks the wire very cleanly, doesn't leave any mess here. And so just take the thread, neaten up the head of the fly, get the whip finisher. I'll deal with the hackle at the end. Take the whip finisher, do 1 whip finish, and 1 more for safety. Trim, and 90% done. Last bit, take the hackle, and rather than putting the point of the scissors in there to cut it, what I do is I kind of slide the scissor blade to the bottom. You don't have to really see this, you just kind of have to feel it. So glide your your scissors to the base of that hackle and just pull on the hackle while holding against the blade. And this is a pretty tough stem. It's harder to break off, but it just cuts it off cleanly there this way. Okay. You get a nice little fuzzy woolly worm, which is the ancestor of the woolly bugger. So the woolly worm is like the mammoth to the woolly bugger, which is the elephant, I guess. I'm assuming they're related. They kind of look similar.
Mhm.
And this is it. It's a searching fly. It's a good lake fly. Some people use it in streams as well. I think it can be floated too. Is this something you're familiar with, anyone?
Oh, yeah.
I had success with that for cutthroat in a Fairy Lake this year.
Did you
How-
fish it like a sunken wet fly, right? The standard way.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and it really was successful. How long is the hackle that you wrapped? Like, is it the width of the gap, or is it much larger than the gap?
I'm not too picky about it because I think all the hackle does is displaces some water and gives the fly some fuzziness. I've looked up, recipe books and stuff, and I've seen people generally tie it like a dry fly hackle, so a little bit bigger than the
Than the
gap of
gap.
the hook.
Yeah,
But I'm not too concerned about that. I guess, I just use whatever I have, and I end up on the small side with this because I have these saddle hackles where it's pretty hard to find proper size 10s and 12s. So my hackle ends up to be a little bit undersized, but I don't see a problem with it.
Lauren, I really like your use of the copper wire at the back. That makes a great deal of sense.
The copper, yeah. I mean, it's I've tried to tie these things, and on the woolly bugger too, I've tried to tie the hackle at the back and go forward, and I never seem to get it right. And once I started to tie the hackle at the front and go back, all of a sudden my flies are starting to look like they're supposed to. And that's the one feature of this fly that makes it not the first fly that a beginner should tie. Maybe the second or third one, but maybe not the first.
Well, partly starting the hackle at the front from the base of the stem and wrapping it to the back and then tying it down with the wire does a couple of things. Usually these hackles on cheaper saddles are tapered. And so when you tie the butt end of the hackle in at the front and wrap it to the back, you'll get a bit of a tapered body, which is where the hackle's longer at the front than at the back. And you use that a lot for woolly buggers. You want them tapered like that. The other option to that is to tie it in at the back and wrap it forward. But you have to tie it in from the tip, not from the butt end of the hackle in order to do that.
And that's what I used to do. And
well, the trick with that is you got to bare the stem, and that first wrap has to be stem. Otherwise it twists on you, right? Just like I was showing today. And then the tail, the only difference between the woolly bugger and this is really basically the marabou tail on a woolly bugger and more open wraps up the hackle, I think. And,
this is more of a parallel, even wraps.
A lot more wraps, yeah.
And your hackle is pretty much perpendicular.
Yeah.
To the hook shank. That's kind of the other key difference. You want the woolly bugger is more of a flowing, swept back.
Now, if you tie this
profile.
If you tie this without a tail and use peacock herl as the body and tie it in small sizes, that's a Griffith's gnat.
Yeah.
Which is a very good all-purpose fly.
I'm
And
gonna
I-
start calling that a floating woolly worm from now on.
Yeah. And I've tied those as high as big as size 8 for a Griffith's gnat. Usually though with those, I trim the hackle so that it's shorter. Looks a lot more fuzzy. But that brings to mind what I might do next week is tie as Henry's Lake Renegade, which is a variation of a Griffith's gnat with a hackle at the back and a hackle at the front with a peacock herl body.
Is that a
And-
two-color, the
Yeah,
two-color fly, or?
It's used just a grizzly hackle, but you use red thread and
Oh, that's the one with the gap in the middle.
yeah, with the peacock herl in the middle, yeah. And the combination of the gap in the middle and the red thread, it's a really good chironomid emerger. So maybe I'll tie that one next week.
I think that could be a snail pattern too, you know, when there are snails floating in the water and trout go after them.
Yeah, well, I
Something
remember
like that probably works in those scenarios too.
Yeah, the best success I had that was out with Rick Lang out at Muir Lake, and we were in my canoe and taking turns paddling. One guy would paddle, the other guy would cast, and we were paddling all around where the weed beds were, and just casting as Henry's Lake Renegade into the gaps in the weeds, and we just had a fabulous day. Barry White remarked, he said, "What are you doing, snagging all those fish?" He couldn't believe how many fish we caught in a short space of time with that bloody little fly. So,
David,
yeah,
you thought of tying, it's a very old pattern, but it's a very good one. It's like a black panel.
don't recognize that.
Do you have one handy?
Oh,
Oh yeah.
He-
You want me to do that next week?
sure.
You need to unmute, Tony. No, you muted yourself back.
There we go. It's a fairly easy fly to tie. But I kind of like it. It's a pretty fly, but evidently it works very, very well in BC waters for trout.
Do you wanna tie that yourself?
No, I'm not at the level that I can. It takes me ages to tie a fly.
Okay,
so,
I can do it then.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's it looks to me like that's a mayfly nymph emerger style pattern.
Yeah.
Of course,
well,
early season, that would be a good early season pattern as well.
Yeah, it works well. Evidently, according to them, that it works well during a hatch of black midge.
Yeah.
But if you do it in larger size, it's not for here, but it's really good for sea trout and Atlantic salmon.
Mhm.
But supposedly very, very good for round.
Tony, could you just hold that up for a second?
Yeah. Where is it now? Here we are.
Okay,
Very
thank
simple.
you.
So what sizes are we talking about here? Like a size 10, 12, 14?
12s, 14s.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, early in the season, the midges are quite a bit larger. I think I talked about that with the Hague Brown guys, that if you're fishing early season chironomids and midge emergers, or even the bloodworms, typically early season are bigger than later in the season. So the biggest ones usually are in spring, and the smaller tend to get smaller over the course of the season.
Right.
What in Alberta, you can get those bloodworms can be like 2.5 to 3 inches long.
Yeah.
And then every instar they shrink by half.
Okay.
So the chironomid's shorter, and then the emerging chironomid's shorter than that, and then the adult's even shorter than that.
Right.
So that would be a very large chironomid.
Okay. Yeah, some
Here is a picture of the web.
Oh, there
Yeah.
you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
But now the one difference, Florin, some people tie it with a dubbed body.
This is
But-
floss by the look of it.
Yeah, it is to do black floss.
Yeah, black floss, black
You want the
hackle.
body to be as slim as possible.
Yeah, yeah. I can
Embroidery
see
thread.
that. Yeah. Yeah, I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think it's within my range, and I see some people are using wire instead of floss.
What size?
12, 14.
Yeah, there you go.
Good stuff.
Oh
So we
boy,
go
what
there.
a zoo out there.
We got a menu for next week: a Henry's Lake Renegade and a black Purnell.
Yeah, I better get busy here learning to tie this. I don't think I've tied this before, but it looks like
Yeah.
It's actually
pretty
it's a
standard
fun
stuff.
tie. It's a fun fly to tie. I enjoy
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, can I just take a moment to put a plug in for Peninsula Stream Society? I need some flies for the fly boxes that the Golden Rods and Reels are going to donate. So if people would let me know that if they've got flies to donate, I'll drive around and pick them up.
Yeah, Bill, if you want to drop by my place, let me know when you're coming and I'll stick it in the mailbox. I got a bag of flies here for you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Sure, Bill, you can drop by my place.
Thank you, Ira. I'll have to get everybody's addresses, but I'll look on the membership list.
Yep, just give me a shout or send me an email when you're coming and I'll make sure it's there for you.
And just a quick question, Dave, when does the Hague Brown do their Zoom fly tying?
Wednesday,
The third Wednesday night of the month.
Okay, and could you send me that link? I just like to do it.
Actually, Margaret is going to post the link onto the Hague Brown website.
Okay,
And if you're on the Hague Brown chat, I will be sending pattern information out for that. I haven't decided what we're going to do next month yet. Margaret was going to give me some suggestions.
What's the membership at Hague Brown, Dave?
I'm
I'd
not
guess-
sure right now.
I'd guess somewhere between 30 and 40 right now. It's not particularly large. And it's probably shrunk over the last year because they haven't been active at all, really, other than Margaret has started in December trying to get a monthly meeting. Actually, she wants to do one next Wednesday. That's not just a sit and tie and chat meeting.